Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, where every week we hear an amazing story from a serious founder who built a valuable software company and did it without big funding. I'm your host, Greg Head, and this week my guests are Anthony Pierri and Rob Kaminski, the partners of Fletch. They're a B2B SaaS positioning team that helps with those very important strategic decisions that more than marketing. They've worked with over 400 B2B SaaS companies to improve their positioning and improve their homepage and website execution as a result of that. They're focused on that, and they are awesome. They're all over LinkedIn with their frameworks and their tools and their stories, and have a huge following there. You've probably seen them. And we dig into how founders are dealing with their strategic questions generally they don't know they have about who are you for, what do you do, what are you best at, why are you different than everybody else, and all the ways that you could tell your story to make it scale faster. It's a great interview with both Anthony and Rob today on the podcast. Hey guys, welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Yes, we got to do that. Who's going to speak first and not speak over each other? I got both of you on the line here. Both of you were at the Practical Founders Summit in Phoenix 3 weeks ago with 40 founders in the room, and we had Growth Day. You guys were the keynote speakers and captivated our audience, very thought-provoking, and spent a couple days with us. So I really appreciate you helping out and dispensing a lot of advice to our practical founders in the peer groups.
For sure. Thanks. It was super fun. I mean, we loved it. We loved Phoenix, which I did not know. I looked it up after. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in America, in the United States.
Yes, I spent 23 years there. That's why I know you can get a great rate on awesome hotels at the end of August there, and the weather ain't too bad except for the dust storm we had. But there's about 5.5 million people there.
I didn't think that was real. Anthony was touting it, and I had to chat GPT it like 3 times. I thought
It's an endless sea of those kind of, desert houses out there, suburbs out there. And I had moved from Chicago to Texas to San Jose and ended up in Phoenix and did a stint there before coming back to Texas. So Phoenix, speaking of positioning, Phoenix is known for, it used to be known for golf and sunshine in the winter and all that kind of thing. But now it's starting to be a little tech town, and there's a lot going on there. Did you get out and see anything when you were there?
We saw one of our employees, but didn't see the sites. The only thing we saw was a little bit of team connection. One of our copywriters was based out there, but we didn't manage to make it into the city, unfortunately.
You opened everybody's eyes in the room at Practical Founders Summit about positioning. They didn't know they had an issue by the time you got to, the end of it and had done demonstrations on about 10 people's websites. They said, oh, this is an opportunity for me to address. So really appreciate that. Rob, can you describe what you and Anthony do at Fletch these days? I know you help a ton of SaaS founders.
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it in positioning, which to us, we're really helping them make some of these key choices about what markets they're going to focus on, and maybe more importantly, not focus on, and then figure out how are they actually going to explain themselves to that market. And so we like to say positioning is the choice of like the strategic audience we want to go after. What's the main argument we actually want to make to that audience relative to the alternatives that are in the space? And the issues with that, especially in B2B, is it's just so fragmented. And that's all we do. They struggle to make this decision. And I think a big part of it is you alluded to this early on, is they don't recognize it as a choice. And there's this temptation to broaden it to death, to be like, no, it's all one market, right? I can just explain myself to everyone the same way. And I think the hard reality is you just can't do that. And so we're helping them suss that out, make that very clear that you cannot do that, and then help them make those hard choices.
Well, show me something that's scaling fast or already big, whether it's Taylor Swift or NVIDIA chips or some B2B SaaS thing, Slack, or Lovable. And I'll show you they're very clear about who they are for and not for. And then show me somebody who's struggling to grow that start up on stage at a pitch event, and everybody looks at each other after the 5-minute overview and they say, I don't understand what that is, which is, I guess, the problem you're solving with positioning. Anthony, do people know that it's a positioning strategy problem and not just a copyright better, email harder tactical problem?
I think by the time someone reaches out to us, if we've done our job well, they will know that they have a positioning problem. And, we chatted about this the other day, but when someone reaches out, books a call with us, and they say, oh, so-and-so said you two would be great to chat with. And I go, great, what do you know about us? Or, how familiar are you with what our work consists of? And they're like, I heard you guys do something with homepages and maybe some sort of strategy. Then I'm like, okay, let's meet again in 6 months after you've had some time to read through some of our content, see what we actually do. And then if you're still interested, it's probably a better time. I don't actually always say that. Sometimes we'll just take the project and they'll be very confused as we start. But really, we have built our business on the back of sharing a ton of expertise freely up front in an effort to try to educate people. By the time they're ready to work with us, they're like, I know I have a positioning problem. I know what positioning is. And I think you guys could potentially help us solve it. And that is a long journey. It's people we're so thankful for, to follow in the footsteps of people like April Dunford, who has this big, super successful book, obviously awesome. That's the name of the book, right? And she puts that out, kind of puts this concept of positioning on the map for B2B software companies specifically. Because obviously we were talking about Al Reese and, Jack Trout from the 80s did it really
in the book on positioning.
Exactly.
Created positioning. Yes.
For sure. In like a consumer space, not exclusively, but like really using lots of examples in the book of like beer companies and, shoe companies and things like that. And so April builds on their work, really puts it into a B2B SaaS context, puts that positioning phrase into the minds of some people, but there still is such an ambiguity of like, what does that even mean? And so for us, all of our content we share is trying to help people understand what it means, the implications, and to diagnose, do I have a positioning problem? And the secret is like almost every startup does, right?
But right in there is an insight, is while almost all of them have a positioning problem, there's nothing worse than trying to sell our service, in this case, to someone who doesn't think they have a positioning problem, which can happen. So even for us, like who we actually position for, it's the founders that are aware. And for a while, this was a huge mistake that we made where as we started to share all this content, we'd get VCs and accelerators and other founders that would refer us and like, oh, you got to go talk to Anthony and Rob. And these founders would get in the room and they're like, yeah, well, my advisor told me I should talk to you. And it's very clear they don't think they have a positioning problem. And whenever we would try and condense, 12 months of content into that 15-minute chat to be like, oh, you do have a positioning problem and we can help. Just the worst projects you can imagine. They're fighting us tooth and nail. They don't think they have an issue. And it's like, what are we doing? And so that was us, like just a symptom of we had actually temporarily broadened our ICP in the lure of, oh, it's a deal, let's take it off the table. But it's a bad idea. It just breaks our processes and all the things.
Yeah, that's right. The ICP includes they're ready to buy. They understand it and they're ready to buy. Like we hear from other people out there. So you've worked with now over 400 software companies, right? This isn't, you made it up last year and you're, pushing it around on the whiteboard this year. You guys have been doing this a long time. And I'm guessing, Rob, you said that when you started, you were just kind of figuring it out like everybody. And it was a startup. And now you guys are very crystal clear about what you do and who you do it for.
Yeah, it's funny to hear you even describe it of like, oh, you guys aren't pushing around stuff on the whiteboard. There was a time, right? Like in the beginning where we probably would have sold to anyone and done anything. In fact, when we started Fletch, we didn't even know it was a positioning service. We thought it was a product marketing consultancy.
We didn't even know that. When you go even further back, we didn't even, I would say it was 6 months into Fletch that I learned what product marketing even was. Because we had a hunch that it would be something positioning related. We liked what April was doing. And then I was like reading around and things. I was like, I think this falls under product marketing. And we were all like, what's product marketing? And we were basically learning from scratch, right? Which is so funny in retrospect. And to Rob's point, our original tagline was like something we would have hilariously made fun of now if we saw it on a website. Our first tagline was helping founders market hard to market products. Like it's about as broad as you can get. Like, okay, what do you do? Do you do content? Do you do ads? And we had the same exact issue, and we were like, it's so cool and clever, but it's so vague and broad.
I call that the ADD phase. You got to get on the field. You got to throw things against the wall. You got to see what it is. You don't end up with, we just do this amazingly for this group and we've done 400 of them. It always works. And here's our process, without trying a dozen things. Like every comic who's got their shtick and performs to millions every year, they ran around for 5 years making stuff up and seeing if it worked. And I call that the ADD phase, your attention deficit disorder. Are we this for these people? Are we this for these people? Are we this for these people? And you're now working, do you limit the software companies you work with, or the kinds of companies, small or large or vertical or horizontal? Or
this is probably the next challenge for us to solve. As of right now, we aren't limiting, and we have, and this shows up even in the way we're doing pricing, we sort of have this tiered approach based on how much money they're making. So it's almost a value-based, which we made that decision for certain reasons. In general, though, whether you're small or large, like positioning problems will bubble up over time. So even the larger companies we work with, like you bring up.
It is though, Rob. It is always either it's usually a B2B company, and it's usually a software company, right? And even explicitly, you could say SaaS. I would say 98% of the companies we work with are B2B software companies.
Yes. We're pretty focused there. But as far as like even today, I was on the horn with someone who, even hard to describe them as a startup. They've been around for a really long time, and they're coming to us and they're describing their scenario, and basically the market's moved and they're like, oh no, like we're building new things, but we don't know. It's like, okay, that's a positioning problem. And so while we position for startups, we do have this sort of wiggle room. I think the biggest thing does come back to, they know they have a positioning problem and they have awareness that it is a positioning problem and they want to solve it. And we've kind of left it at that for now within that B2B software space.
Well, I worked with about 100 companies doing this. I call this strategic marketing strategy, which is really positioning, which is really business strategy. What are you making? Who are you for? Right? They think they have a tactical marketing and sales problem. They really have a business strategy problem, right? And I could get there. I always enjoyed it when we get the whole team, the VP of sales, the chief sales, the best sales guy, the support person, a couple other executives, and the founder of the room, and we say, all right, what is it? Let's make a list. And you get the list of the 50 things that it is. It's a little bit this, it's a little bit that. And then they start to worry. Uh-oh. That's not very clear. Well, don't worry, but we'll focus on, okay, who is it for? And then the list is twice as long there. And then you realize that it sits there on the whiteboard, and you realize, yeah, we're many things to many people. This is the problem you're solving, Anthony. We're start off being many things for many people, or trying different things on. Do you need to be known as the best at something important for someone specific, or can you be many things to many people and just email harder?
The one thing to remember is people often assume when they come to work with us, they're like, I don't want to verticalize. I don't want to be for one specific industry.
Pigeonhole. Don't pigeonhole.
Say exactly that, Greg. I was like just waiting for the
I know. That's a sales.
So I always try to remind them that there are ways to be specific without necessarily just picking an industry. Like you can be very focused and solve a very tangible pain point that makes you easy to remember, easy to share, word of mouth, without necessarily being like, it's only for this logistics or e-commerce. And so like we try to get that off the table, and you can see example after example, like companies like Calendly solving a hyper-specific use case. Exactly, a horizontal, but to be horizontal, it has to be specific enough that you could use the same words and phrase to a teacher, to a CEO, to a firefighter. Hey, we'll help you schedule meetings over email. Calendly can give that pitch to relatively anyone, and they would say, interesting, I schedule meetings over email. How are you going to do it better? And so finding these other ways to kind of anchor the story based on these reference points are ways to be specific without necessarily saying, okay, I have to throw away all my other industries and only go after one. So there's trade-offs in that sense. And then we ask people in the intake survey, what's your revenue and how much have you raised if they're a venture-backed company? And they always are like, a lot of the people will say, why do you ask? Like, what does this have to do with positioning? And we're like, because the strategy is only as good as what you can execute on. So when you list and you're like, I don't want to go more narrow than these 10 very different markets, we say, awesome. Did you happen to raise a couple $1 billion, like OpenAI and, Anthropic? And then they say, well, no. And I say, well, how many people are on your go-to-market team? And they say, well, we got 3 of us. And I'm like, how much are you making revenue? And they're like, we make $300K. I'm like, you're not going to be able to go win 10 markets at the same time. It's just not feasible. And so a lot of like how narrow you go is directly tied to the amount of resources you have at your disposal. Or if you're OpenAI and you're sitting on, I don't know how much they've raised, 50 billion, 100 billion or something, you can have a OpenAI or ChatGPT for personal anyone, you can have the ChatGPT business, you can have the developer platform, you can have Sora, the video product, you can have the 50 different things they're doing all at once because they have infinite money. So sure, go and land grab and Sam Altman wanted to raise, what was it, $6 trillion was his next raise he was hoping for. It was like more money than, multiple of the biggest companies in the world. It's like, that's all I need. I just need 6 trillion. Like, great. If you're Sam Altman, you go ahead. You go ahead and do that. But for the rest of us mortals, you might have to go a little more specific at first.
Do you notice a difference? You've done a longevity study here. Do you notice a difference in their ability to decide on a clear positioning that works between VC funded and bootstrappers? I see a difference, but I don't know if you see the same thing.
There's like 2 answers to this question that pop into my mind. The short answer is yes. Bootstrappers are willing to see opportunity, tackle opportunity, because almost every market is big enough to sustain a $10 million company. Like, I don't care how narrow you get, the world's a big place. So even with a hyper-focused, verticalized niche use case play, there's plenty of money if you do it well, and that's pretty appealing to bootstrappers. And there's like, I don't care. Like, I'm in this more for that lifestyle aspect. The VC ones, yeah, not so much. But what I will say is the founders that truly understand positioning and the idea that it can evolve over time, whether they're venture backed or not, they too can adopt the very narrow practice. And in fact, I just posted about this today, and they're the ones who are able to lean into the insight Anthony just shared. And they're like, I know I can't eat this whale all at once. I know I need to start somewhere. I know it's going to be strategic. Like, that's where these VC players, ironically, can play like a bootstrapper temporarily to gain this footing in the market, and then go from there and do all the things that.
And some of the best VC founders of our history did that, right? Amazon was just books.
Who didn't?
Exactly. Who didn't, right? Like, most of the really big ones were incredibly focused, and then they expanded, right? Facebook did that. Pretty much along the line, they all started and became a market leader in a market and then expanded. Spotify didn't go beyond music to podcasts and audiobooks till they had IPO'd. And they only added podcasts once they were the number 1 music provider in the world. And then they only added audiobooks once they were the number 1 podcast in the podcast like streaming service in the world. So they were like, great, we dominated the market. Let's add on another one. And each one has been a huge jump in their, revenue. And they only did it from a position of strength.
Yeah. So what you're saying is we start off VC funded or bootstrapped, and we have the whiteboard of we could be this kind of thing, or call it this for this audience, call it different for this audience, be a little of this, and we can nudge it this way. And we're kind of in the matrix of we could be many things to many people. But to move faster, VC funded founders need to move fast. They're willing to put a bet on one of the focus areas just to get going, right? Be known as the best at something and then expand from there, expand their product, expand their target customer, something like that. Is that how you're seeing it there?
Effectively, yes. Yeah, I think that was summarized quite well.
Do you need to work with the founder, CEO? I mean, I think that's part of the magic that the founder kind of sees the whole business and somebody's hand is on the steering wheel. But this doesn't work if you're working with a marketing department or a copywriting team or something like that. Do you have to have the executive team if they have it, or the founders together?
The short answer is yes, unless the founders have truly delegated ownership over, I'll say, parts of the business. Because some of the larger companies we work with, they end up operating like almost as GM units, where, okay, you're the CMO of that unit, like you're effectively the founder. You're going to make all the decisions associated to go to market. If you don't do that, it flat out won't work. Like, it's just, there's going to be zero follow through to hold your teams accountable, to repeat yourself over and over. And I think that's what people forget. Like, designing these positioning strategies and coming up with ideas, like, takes literally seconds and minutes. Like it's pretty easy to do. The hard work is then
Here
showing
are
up
all your
every single
options,
day.
right?
Yes.
Yes, right.
And we do that pretty quickly. And like some founders scoff at the idea, oh, you're going to position my company in a couple of hours? And it's like, yeah, it's like the hard work is just following through of like, we're going to do that. We're going to show up in all the channels where this audience hangs out, and we're going to repeat the message for the next 24 to 36 months. And like, that's where the positioning works. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And the other thing too that we often tell the people that we say, people will say, well, this is a 2-week sprint. That seems pretty short to make these decisions. And we're like, yeah, you're not going to be gathering insights about your market and customers during those 2 weeks. Like you have to have already done the work of talking to your customers, understanding what types of markets are out there, who's the competition is, and basically bring all of that as inputs to the process. People will sometimes be like, well, I don't know that I could answer questions like about my customers. And we say, don't start this process then. Like go figure out what people are buying.
Why did you start the business in the first place? Was there actually a market opportunity, a real problem that existed? And like, that's not a positioning problem, like point blank. That is like a entrepreneurial market research challenge of sorts. And so, yeah, if you don't show up with some intuition about your market and what they're dealing with.
And rule of thumb, it should feel like a great time to do a positioning project, whether it's with us or on your own or with someone else. A good barometer is like, is everyone kind of banging their heads against the wall? You're feeling natural pull from different team members. Like someone's like, I think we should go after this market. Someone else is like, I think we should go after this market. Someone else is like, I want to go broad. If there's disagreement and you need to get alignment and you're willing to say, whatever we pick, we're going to be comfortable running after it for the next year. And if you're like, everything is too much in flux, thinking about doing one strategy for a year feels like a death sentence, then we say, probably not ready to do a positioning project, because any positioning project, especially if we're talking sales-led B2B software, is going to take at least a year. And like, I've used this example before, but on the back of my phone, I have this pop socket, right? So is this pop socket going to be better positioned for a consumer as a phone stand? Is it better positioned as a phone holder, a multi-tool thing? You could probably figure that out in an afternoon with a really good set of ads and some metrics of like, we ran these ads and, this one seems like that's really going to be the thing and we're going to go that direction. But if you're like, okay, do we want to position ourselves as a BI tool for this specific industry, or do we want to position ourselves for some radically different group as a whatever? I don't know. You could think of whatever the example would be. You're like, awesome.
AI data platform. Yeah.
Perfect. AI data platform. Either of these strategies is going to take at least a quarter to get the word out that you are this category, to even let people know that you're positioning for these specific people. Then the sales cycle starts, which will probably be, if it's a higher ACV, at least 6 months. Then you start the process of working with these people as clients, and then you have to see, how are they as customers? Do they churn? Do they upsell? Do they cross-sell? And so now we're talking at least a 12-month bet. And like, we worked with this company called Freckle. We ran the positioning strategy with them. He had an insight about the market. We positioned for them. The positioning strategy on the marketing front actually worked incredibly well. They landed all these new customers. They got all this buzz. Everyone was super excited about it. And then they found out that the customers that they had bet on actually weren't that great of customers once they became customers. And so it was like, oh no, we actually probably need to shift our positioning. Even though it worked on the front end, the long-term view of like a year and a half, it determined that they didn't turn out to be the right customer fit that was actually good once they had bought. So we actually ran the process with them again like a year and a half later, and we repositioned again for a slightly different audience that they had figured out was even better once they became customers. So we're dealing with long timelines. And so you kind of have to be okay with thinking about it that way.
Can you be up and running and get, say, a lower priced SMB kind of product, 100 customers or 200 customers, and then say, let's look at our customer base. These kind of customers are awesome. They stay with us. They buy more stuff. They tell their friends. These kind of customers, the ICPs on one side, the other kind of customers on the other end, the CCPs, crappy customer profile. They yell at us. They take our time. They cost a lot to acquire. They rate us low. They don't tell their friends or say negative things. Can you go inside a customer base and and deduce where you should be aiming, or is it some other kind of strategic process?
If you take off the rosy colored glasses, I think you can. But I think a lot of founders, they see all those customers as like, they paid, they signed up. Like they tend to like negotiate with themselves.
They're all
like,
good.
No.
Yeah,
they're
right.
all good. They all have the same problem. And so you have to be pretty ruthless with yourself and like of who those people are. From a data standpoint, I think it also gets tricky because data can be sliced 100,000 different ways. And I think you can convince yourself that even some of those bad fit ones are good ones. Because, and actually, I just heard Mark Andreessen talk about this. He talks about it as like the fat tail of customer behavior. You can find every outlier you want of like a bad fit customer who actually did renew. And it's like, great, we should go after more of those. Yeah, right. I got one. And like, that's where you just have to be really careful. And ultimately, what this comes back to is like founder insight. Like, do you really understand your customers and do you have conviction about who the good ones really are? And it's not going to be perfect. And there's certainly not going to be data that's going to point directly to it. And so the idea of that, and some people call it product sense, some people call it sales sense. It's like all those things sort of folded in together. So my take is you can spot them if you're looking for them. You have to be really self-aware and you have to be really honest with yourself.
And to the same thing, right? The other part of uncertainty is the shifting of the markets itself, right? Because you think back to Zoom was primarily positioning for like SMB use cases in like 2015, and they were not doing great. And so you could argue, let's say they were going to do a repositioning project in 2019 or end of 2019. They're like, this has not been working. We've been beating our heads against the wall, wrong segment. We got to reposition for someone else. And then the pandemic happens, and all of a sudden, the bad segment became this amazing segment, and they became, like the hottest startup on the block. So that's the other challenge is like groups of people, when things change in the market that are beyond your control, can suddenly make a bad segment a really good segment, or vice versa. A really good segment could suddenly become a bad segment because maybe a competitor adds in the features and functionality that you had, and all of a sudden your best ones were like, oh, well, the product we were all using that we were switching to, they just added exactly what you guys do. And all of a sudden you're like, all right, we got to go find someone else. And so that's why it's so challenging. Like, you can learn from the past historical data, but only so much when we're talking about like making business strategy bets, right? Because if anyone could truly just come up with the algorithm that was going to solve startup uncertainty, like, we would all be out of business as consultants, and that person would be the richest person to ever live.
You share a ton of your frameworks on LinkedIn. Really appreciate it. Get a lot of conversation going. You have a huge following, and I encourage everybody to check those out, right? Don't take my word for it or their word for it. Go see Anthony Pierri and Rob Kaminski at Fletch on LinkedIn and look at their posts and the conversations that are coming of that. You share a lot of your frameworks. Are you guiding people through how you're seeing it with your structure, and the CEO founder on the other side and their team are making the decisions? You're giving them the choices and they're making the decisions. You could do this, you could do that. Here's the plus and minuses. You're not prescribing, you ought to be this for these people, or are you?
You described it perfectly. So the way we frame it is our process and those frameworks, they're used to extract out the market insight that the founder has to show them what the potential options are. And I think the crux is most people, they don't even realize they're different directions. And for any of the founders out there,
being many things to many people, right? You kind of you make that very clear. You're doing all of these things right now. Which one makes sense? Let's go through that.
And what's funny is a lot of the founders that come to us, as Anthony said, like, they know they have a positioning problem. And so they're sort of aware that they're different things, but they've never actually categorically talked about them as separate paths. And so that's the power of the framework.
They're holding them in their head as the market and the potential and a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit upstream and a little bit downstream, all that.
And it's amazing when you can visualize the paths and you see them, and we hope we get this reaction. You get this, oh shit moment of like, oh, these are all different. Oh man, I am doing all these things. And that is like, that self-awareness is like step one. If you don't have that, like you're never going to get there because you've just conceptualized it all as one thing. And I had one client, actually, they articulated it quite well when they saw the options. They're like, we're having a conversation of all 5 of these options as our strategy in a 3-hour discussion every day. And it's because they're ping-ponging around related to the execution.
There's arm wrestling going on. I want to go this way. I want to go this way. Yeah.
And so, yeah, you nailed it. Like for us, it's like, these are the paths. And then what we have to do is we have to take what we know and then walk out, well, okay, what are the implications of each path? Because they all suck to a degree. Like there is no...
there's a sacrifice to go one way or the other. Yeah.
There's no yellow brick road of positioning for any company. It's like you have to choose your hard, and we try and give them clarity into that hard. And these are things like, more specifically, we usually look at like a go-to-market lens of like, what are the implications of this? And so Anthony brought up Freckle. It's a wonderful example because there was a strategy in there that would have involved them kind of stepping into the spotlight to evangelize this idea of a go-to-market engineer and the fact that nobody needs it. And so Anthony did a wonderful job where he just voiced it to the founder. He's like, hey, Nathan was his name. He's like, are you willing to be this leading influencer to actually go get this to work? And he was pretty honest. He's like, no, I don't want to be famous. I don't want to do that. And it's like, okay, valid positioning option, but it doesn't work for you. And so we can't choose that path. And so we're walking out go-to-market implications and then also just product implications. Like, can you actually build the thing to do what we're going to go promise? And then when you walk out all those things, they all suck. And that's where the decision point comes in.
And to your point, Greg, we try very hard not to prescribe, like come in with the deck stacked. And so we try to, and sometimes we've messed this up. Sometimes we're like, we really think you should do this one. But in general, we will try to present a range of options that could theoretically be viable that may have different levels of risk associated with them. That, like, if you think of it like a financial advisor, what's your level of risk tolerance? Do you want to put all your money in, an index fund? Do you want to put it in Bitcoin? We sort of present the same way. We're like, you could do this. It could theoretically work, but it will be incredibly risky because of X, Y, and Z. You could do this. It'll be much more conservative, but way less risk and more potential that you could get this off the ground, get you to 5 million, 10 million, whatever that number might be. And then they have to kind of self-decide where do they fall on that spectrum and what do they want to do? What are they comfortable with?
This podcast is sponsored by my friends at Cypress Growth Capital. At some point in your growth, you'll know you could grow faster with some outside funding, but selling a part of your company to VCs would change your whole game. And we know that's the most expensive growth capital on the planet. That's why so many practical SaaS founders I know have partnered with Cypress Growth Capital when they hit that predictable growth inflection point. For 15 years, Cypress has provided non-dilutive growth funding to bootstrap SaaS founders, including 6 successful founders I've interviewed here on this podcast. Cypress provides enough patient capital for you to invest in your growth without giving up any of your precious equity. They leverage their entrepreneurial and operational experience to provide savvy strategic guidance to help you grow efficiently and build your valuable software company faster. Go to cypressgrowthcapital.com/practical to learn more and set up a time with Cliff Centel to see if there's a fit. Now back to our program. Do you find that the founder can make the call, or they got to go meet with their teams and have the commiseration and all that? As you describe it, it's like a bet, like it's a betting strategy. And what they, I guess, are falsely believing is, if I don't bet, everything's okay, right? If I don't make any decisions about who we're for and who we're not for, then it'll all work out. But they get stuck that way.
This one's so funny because I almost feel like we get this microcosm of almost government in these sessions. Like, we learn quite a bit about how these businesses operate. Some are these, totalitarian dictatorships where it's like, I'm the founder, I'm going to decide. And we love that because they're like willing to have an opinion and put the, stake in the ground. We've got other groups that are like, they're very like socialist style. Like, no, is everybody okay? Like, we want everyone to agree. But it is such a spectrum, to be honest. And for us, it's about nudging them of like, look, you can make the decision however you want, but a decision does have to get made. And foundationally, I think this puts a lot of pressure on founders to really understand, are they suited for the job of a founder and CEO? Like, these are the decisions. And when you put them off, and we've seen this, unfortunately, and it's sad, I'm not going to call anybody out, where we see some founders where it's like, man, you should probably be a VP of engineering. Like, you're great at building the thing. Once you have a remit, you can build quality products. But these trade-off decisions that are the key, as you call them, marketing strategy decisions, if you can't make them, like, are you really a founder? And we have to sometimes push on that in a very thoughtful way to get them to see that, like, they're the ones holding back their company from executing. Because once they choose, the teams can go and execute and support it.
I always found, maybe you find this, that when you get it up there and you see the options, you make the choice, and then generally one choice becomes more obvious than the others. And everybody says, we're actually that. We've been faking it with all this other stuff. Let's just be that. Then people can hear what we are. There's kind of a cheer in the whole team. Like, we can execute on that. Like, as opposed to we can execute a little bit of this, a little bit, so execution should work better very quickly. Like, your conversion rate should go up on your website, usually, because it's a mess right now. I like what you do. Did you always do this, which is you do the frameworks, the decisions, and you're prototyping and wireframing like homepage designs as a concrete vision of this? So it isn't like fuzzy. It's there it is, this versus that. And then that's your deliverable. But like, did you always do that, Anthony?
We came up with that sort of on accident. It was not a brilliant insight that led us to doing this. We really stumbled into it, where we were first thinking, okay, well, we want to publicly provide value to get people interested. There's a guy named Drew McClellan. He's got a good podcast called Build a Better Agency, I think it's called, or Building a Better Agency. And he said this quote that has stuck with me to this day. He said, if you want to have an expertise-based business, you have to publicly demonstrate your expertise, which is so unbelievably obvious, but so many consultants do the opposite. They say, I don't want to give away my secret sauce. You have to come talk to me before I give any of this value away because I don't want my competitors to steal it, whatever. So we went the opposite way. We said, what if we were truly open sourced when it comes to this framework? We put everything publicly. We once ran our whole process with a real company on LinkedIn Live. And we were like, anyone can come watch start to finish. You can watch all the workshops and you could steal every idea in here if you want. But we think that actually provides a lot of credibility to get people to want to work with us. So at the very beginning, we were thinking, okay, well, what are we going to do?
Yeah, I want you to continue. Yeah. That project on Live, total failure because the founders weren't willing to be honest. They were like stage fright, and so we didn't really get into some of the key questions. But
they did eventually launch it, though. They it came around by the end, and it did go live.
One of them, we did two of them. Yeah, one was really
one of them
bad.
Was not good. One was much better than the other.
Yeah. But continue. Yeah.
Yeah, but so either way, we were like, how can we publicly evaluate positioning to even say, is this clear positioning or not clear positioning? And obviously, the simplest place to do that is to look at people's websites. Is it easy for me to fill out the positioning Mad Lib? We're X company for Y, based on what they have on their website. And what we quickly realized is no, most of the time it's like almost non-existent. And so that started us down this path where we would share, hey, we don't know who this product is for. We'd give critique. We'd say, we think it would be a lot clearer if you said this or that. And then all of a sudden people would say, can you help me fix my homepage? And so these two things just became linked. And it was actually a blessing in disguise because it's not often that companies we know will say, we need to do a dedicated repositioning project. It's almost always attached to new head of marketing at a startup says, we are going to redo the website and let's make sure that we have it all right before we run all this marketing to send traffic to the website. Let's make sure we have the story down, and then they will go out to a positioning project. So we found it was way easier to sell positioning strategy if you led with the Trojan horse of, you're going to rewrite your homepage in this very tactical win that can go live and get everyone on board. And on the back of it, what does it take to write a good homepage? It takes a really good positioning strategy.
And you guys could look at a homepage and say, oh, geez, you're being confusing here. I don't understand. You get to the bottom of the page and you say, I don't really understand what you guys do. Yes, you're all about revenue ROI and AI powered and fireworks and things. But what are the elements? Let's just start with you, Anthony. We can keep going. Like, what are the elements of positioning in that Mad Libs, the homepage bingo that people need to see clearly?
Yeah. So for us, we think of them as reference points. And we call them use case anchors. We call them positioning anchors. And there's kind of these three types of these anchors. You need one of these, And so what we would say is you would say it's either a category that you're in, which a strong reference point is a product category that everyone knows. If you say, I'm a CRM, great. Now I know what you do. If you don't have a good category to be in, a use case is a second really good reference point, right? We help people schedule meetings over email. Great. Second, the use case anchor, hyper specific. And then the third one would be an alternative, something you replace. If maybe you service a lot of use cases, you don't really fall into a category. Companies like this, like Airbnb, when you ask what category is Airbnb, you're usually met with blank stares. They're not really, well, I don't know. But, and you say, why do people use Airbnb? Well, they use it for business. They use it for vacation. So there's all these use cases. They don't really fit in a category. So what do? They just say we are an alternative to hotels. And that's essentially the marketing strategy they've run since day one. And they still do it to this day. They're running YouTube ads being like, don't stay in a hotel. Your whole family will be forced in one room. Get a whole house with an Airbnb. So those are the three reference points. You need one of those three. You either need a really clear category, a use case that's very clear, or an alternative that you replace. It's also pretty specific. And then the second half of that is just, what do you do better than that thing? What do you improve on? If you're in a category, why are you a better CRM than the other CRMs? If you're in a use case, why are you the best way to perform that set of activities compared to how people perform them today, right? Why are you better? Why is it better to send a Loom video to update your team than it is to have a meeting, right? And then the last one, why are you better than that alternative anchor? Like if you really are replacing hotels, what makes people not want to go to a hotel and go to an Airbnb? And it's like, if you can just get those two things, a primary positioning anchor or a reference point in one of those three categories, and then what your differentiation or value is compared to the other things in that same camp, that's like enough to have a whole positioning narrative. And then you can flesh it out more with like specific firmographics of types of companies you might be like. Maybe it's for a CRM that's better than Salesforce because it was built for logistics companies or something like that, where you can layer on industry stuff or persona stuff of like, this is really only for demand gen marketers, or this is really only for RevOps folks. Any of those additional segmentation stuff is like icing on the cake. It's like great. But if you can fundamentally just get one of those key reference points plus like your differentiated value related to the other things in that reference point, that's usually enough to make a pretty compelling and clear positioning, which like you could usually get into a headline. Like you can say, what was the Loom one
amazing?
For a while? Yeah, Loom's was skip the meeting, send a Loom. And then like the H2 on the website was like, Loom lets you update your team by recording your screen and your, computer at the same time, to something like that. Like, and it was like spend 30% less time in meetings. Like it was like so clear in 2 sentences what this thing is and why it's better than its alternative, that it was like, great. And even big companies can do this, but it does take discipline.
But what if I needed video for some other use case and all those people that I might want to sell to find a big market?
It's a good question.
Yeah, that's right. So you're saying, so that includes category and you get around the new category game when there isn't a word for it, that kind of thing. Is that the what? I mean, firstly, get to a website and you have to explain what it is. What does your product do? The microphone in front of the sales guy, and they take a deep breath and go on for 5 minutes, and then you're really not sure what they do. But you can do it by use case. You can do it by category. You can do it by these reference anchors there. Are you as concerned about who that's for, this particular audience?
Yeah, the interesting thing is they kind of imply a who, right? Like jobs to be done theory. The big insight of it was that you can have a jobs-based segment. That if you say every person, if you said for Calendly, their use case anchor was scheduling meetings over email, that in itself is a segment, right? It might include a teacher and a firefighter and a CEO, but they all fall into, we are all performing this job regularly, and so we're going to market to them. And then someone like Calendly has to decide, do I want to start with this use case based segment? And then do I actually want to shrink it at all to make my marketing even more effective? Like, is this actually for people scheduling meetings over email who are in a sales team? Like that was a Calendly competitor. No, it was a Loom competitor for called Vidyard. And like Loom was, you can send videos to update your team for any reason. That's like a big job to be done based segment. Vidyard said, well, what if we layer on a sales persona to effectively shrink that market more to make it even better? And it was, you can send a video to update people in a sales context. So you're sending it to prospects, and they added in all these features. You can also think of the category-based one where you say Square is a point of sale system. And so people in all sorts of segments need a point of sale to swipe a credit card. It's people at a farmer's market. It's people in a store. So they were like, that's our category-based segment. And then Toast comes out and says, let's start with the market for the category and add an industry slice. It's just for restaurants who are shopping for point of sale systems. And then they can do their slightly shrunken market. And both companies have gone on to be really successful.
$1 market. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. On publicly traded. So if you think about it, we always think like these, if you think of these anchors as representing segments, then the question becomes, is that broad segment good, or do we need to shrink it more? But starting with, like, if you think of Airbnb, they start with the market of people who are using hotels. And they say, how are we going to get a meaningful slice of the hotel market to build this alternative to hotels? And they've gone on, now they're bigger than the top 5 hotel chains combined. But so that's the tricky thing about these reference points is they both are the simplest way of answering what you do, but they also are a weird way of answering who you are for, because they're only going to resonate to certain groups.
Thanks for sharing that. And I know that's part of the puzzle that you reveal to the founders and their teams, and you show it in a clear way so they can make decisions about it. And Anthony, you said something about the more you narrow in, the better your execution works. It's almost like when you focus, you can grow faster and more efficiently because people hear what you're doing and you send out the beacon. Rob, is this always an exercise in focus to improve execution?
In general, yes, absolutely. But it's interesting. You even asked the question in a couple different ways of like, do you have to position? Like, and we see this even on the homepage, like, do you have to say exactly who you're for? And the short answer is no. But when we walk out to these founders, like, again, it comes back to choosing your hard. Like, you can be as broad as you want to be, and you can actually have a business that turns a profit. Expect everything to be hard. And so this focusing is sort of this cheat code for product road mapping to be easy, for marketing to be easy, for sales to get easy. And if you've ever experienced that, where you know clearly where the line is yes and then clearly where the line is no, like you can't go back. But it is a choice. And I think a lot of the founders, like we spun out of a larger digital product studio that had all these different services. By some definitions, like successful business, they turn a profit every year. If you looked under the hood, operational chaos. It's like custom craziness.
Many things to many people agency.
Yeah. And so like you bring up growth, and like especially for some of the bootstrappers out there, like you can build a very undifferentiated, poor positioned business. Just expect it to be really freaking hard and to take a lot longer. And even from like the big venture back guys, I like to pull out the extreme example. Zapier, I love, because when Zapier launched, their founder made this long-term bet where they didn't actually position for a decade plus. And they said, we're going to go long tail. And what they did is they effectively created tens of thousands of unique positionings. They went out and created literally a web page saying, here's this highly specific use case, connect this to that. And like just thousands of variations on that, because they were just betting, I'm in this for the long haul. I bet if we did this for 10 years and get people in and they start using more of these things, there will be a big valuable business at the end of the day. And like their intuition was correct. Most founders don't have the patience for that. They're just like, wait, 10 years? I don't even know if I have 5. I don't know if I have 18 months. I'm on this runway. And it's like, well, great. Like, then you probably should make a choice of exactly who you're for to simplify for your marketing team of half a person and an intern. Like, but it's a choice at the end of the day.
Yeah. And it's a decision, which means to cut off, and strategy is what you say no to, and so forth. Can you give some examples when it's the right time and the company is stuck and hovering and it's clearly many things to many people? Can you give some examples of what happens when they say, we've decided on this, the founder says, we're betting on this, don't talk about the other stuff, we're going this direction, and then things pick up again? I've seen it 100 times. It's pretty amazing. What happens on the other side of making a focused decision other than feeling good about your homepage?
We walk out these hypotheticals all the time. Anthony does probably a much better job at this because we sometimes will play the role of like, if you don't choose, and we'll even use the people's names in the call. It's like, yeah, your marketing leader over there, Laura, yeah, she's going to leave because she's going to get so frustrated that every time she goes to build a campaign, there's no real audience. And so like, you ask for specific examples, Anthony, maybe you have some that come to mind. But in general, they sort of peter out and they flail around a lot. Then they start to resort, like if you follow the cascade, they start to resort to like just pure tactics of like what's popular, and they'll grab any playbook. Yeah, any playbook they can get. And so they'll go do all of that. And then, they'll come across Adam Robinson. They'll be like, oh, yeah, brand is everything. Like, we need a podcast. We need this. They'll start doing video. And so like all the tactics fall down, and it really just comes to this view of like they think that it's a execution problem, and it really falls back to this strategy problem.
But on the flip side though, Greg, right? Like if they do make a decision and the whole company starts going in the same direction, it usually explodes in success. Like if their thesis about the market is correct, which sometimes it's not, it usually will make everything easier because product now has a good roadmap. Like it's funny having product leaders on these calls. They are often the ones who are the most excited by the decision because they say, this is amazing. I've been having to balance the feature requests from this group, which have nothing to do with this group, and then trying to make it so the product is in this big jumbled mess. They all want different things. So like product feels it immediately. And then when they're like, hey, you don't have to think about those people anymore. You don't have to make the features for them. And
we're just mid-market. We're just for dermatologists.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It makes
we're
it life
just for
so
people
easier.
who know they have a problem. Right.
Yeah. And so, and we didn't always walk out the product roadmap implications, but we do that more now that we'll say like, if you go this route, this will have big implications on your product strategy. And, like take a company that has a big platform. The decision to market it as a platform versus a suite of products that can be purchased independently of each other, huge implications, right? Like the platform message is like, all right, you're going to have to convince people to rip and replace 10 tools to get this giant, super expensive platform all at once that has a really, really, long implementation time and all this stuff versus like the suite of products approach is like, no, you could take your suite. Some people can come buy this one. Some people can buy that one. You cross sell. It's more on the customer success side of getting, the lifetime value of these companies up. But there's going to be big product implications either way, right? The platform approach, it has to be visible and working at the same time. The suite of products, it's like, it's better actually if you can abstract away some of these other products. It doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I just joined this massive platform that has all these modules that don't even work. And like, no, I'm just over here in the corner of this. So I think once you make these decisions, you could just see the team get so excited and light up. And like, especially the product marketers and the marketers are like, now I know who am I going to actually market to? What campaign I'm going to run? I don't have to worry about all these other ones. And the salespeople too of like, great, I can already figure out who the exact account list is going to be. Like I know exactly what these people are. I can get the same case studies. I can start getting some word of mouth of like, we worked with this person in this industry and, we worked with that person. They don't have to think about like building up 10 different sets of case study libraries and ROI stories. Because everyone always with startups, when they're trying to de-risk working with a new startup, they're always like, well, have you worked with other companies like us? Can you show us the ROI that, and it's like, if you're new, you're like, no, you're going to be the first one in this segment. And don't you want to take a big risk on us? And people don't want to take the risk. So it definitely makes everything just go way better.
It reminds me of that quote, and I'm sure he stole it. Tim Ferriss did this quote a while back in one of his famous blog posts of like, I'm going to make the decisions that make 1,000 decisions for me. And it's exactly that. Like you're putting up these guardrails so that, as Anthony just articulated, product roadmap, marketing ops, everything just gets, the decision's made. Like if it doesn't fall into the remit, like we don't do it. And it's so black and white. And when you remove that ambiguity for your teams, like they can just go do what you hired them to do and what they probably have a bunch of great skill sets around to go execute.
And for Bootstrappers, which is the hidden majority, right? And nobody has infinite funding, not even big companies, but it makes everything that much more, like twice as efficient, 10 times as efficient. We're just going after these people, ignore the rest. Don't try to buy customers that aren't going to be happy. Like it makes everything monstrously more efficient. And as you said, like really the bottom of the sales funnel is a year later. Are they happy and telling their friends? And
It's so crazy too, because I remember when we started doing this, like we started saying no to people when we actually did figure out, it is a positioning service and not product marketing as a service. The people you say no to end up evangelizing your positioning to the point where they probably bring in more clients, or they even come back as a client themselves. It's so backwards. They're like, wait, you just said no? I'm trying to give you thousands of dollars. And we're like, yeah,
it's almost like it's a test. Like if you would sell to somebody like me, I wouldn't want to buy from you, right? It's a test. Are you really focused? Do you really have something about, you can't make something great if you sell to everybody. I mean, that's by definition, that kind of thing. Let's talk about, we talk about the homepage and you can feel it and being many things to many people. What other typical scenarios do founders who $500,000, $1 million, 5 million, getting to 10 million, face? And there's a few different phases in there, but are there other kinds of decisions that are typical out there?
Yeah, the first one that comes up is like shiny object syndrome to a T. And these are companies that usually when they're in that range, something's working. And so they're like, I have the success. And they know there's this big opportunity in front of them. And Anthony and I always had this heuristic, and I think this is where like power of a co-founder, like preventing that, because we almost fell trapped to this, but not really. I don't think we've ever come too close to it, because anytime one of us was like, hey, there's a whole other way to make money, there's a whole other thing we could build, the other person would just jab and be like, oh, that's product number 17 and product number 34. And so we have this long running list of just product ideas that we want to do. And I think that requires conviction. I think it really also requires an understanding of your marketing and your recognition in the market compounds over time, but it's invisible and there's no way to measure it. And so the idea of staying power, of like, if you're just in the game for an extended period of time, like it's just the most powerful platform to go launch other products from. And I think, going back to your specific question, the founders that get there, I think they just get overexcited and then they want to just go run at it all, like altogether. And some of them will raise money to go do it. And it's like, even that is like, no, like build your foundation. I think of like the kind of, I don't know if you watch The Office, but there's like a hysterical episode where they're building a tower out of bad review cards in the annex. And Kevin's like, no, I don't think you get it. We go up, like make it grow up. And they're trying to explain to him of like, no, we got to lay the foundation before we go up. And I like that's this analogy that's in my head, is like, everyone's like, no, up higher, up to the right, make small number go bigger, as Anthony said in his presentation. And they just forget, it's like, no, this is a marathon.
Well, it's kind of the founder way, which is, we're running hard and we're optimistic and we see big things. It just, somebody explained it to me this way: it's hard to read the label from inside the jar, right? So it's hard for us to see how the world sees us. Anthony, can you think of other things that founders who are listening to this might recognize as a challenge that they might start thinking about?
Yeah, I think once they start getting success, I think it can sometimes cloud everything, especially when you get, let's say, you're an more enterprise-focused company and you land some big whales. Then I think they often, similar to what Rob was saying, but they don't realize, like, when we were starting our business, we tried to say we're not going to do a service for someone unless we would be willing to do that same service for 100 more people. And so it's like, this person over here said, well, we want to do this. You would write a sales deck for us. And it's like, great, that's money. But do we want to add sales decks as a service that we would do 100, 200, 300 more times? And a lot of times we said, no, we don't want to do that. But the problem is when the software companies land some big companies, like let's say they land 5 enterprise companies, each at $1 million ACV. Now they're a $5 million company. And so they can start getting a little excited, like, man, we're really killing it. And it's like the concept, they'll be like, we definitely have product market fit. We have $5 million we're making each year. And we're like, awesome. Tell me about this market that the product is a fit for. And they're like, well, we have 5 customers. They're each in a different industry. They each want something else. And we're
a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're like, do you actually have product market fit? Maybe not. Because to us, a market would imply multiple of the same type of customer. And there's a guy, Rob is his name. Rob, and I'm blanking on his last name. Maybe you'll remember.
Snyder?
Rob, different Rob. Yes, Rob Snyder. So Rob Snyder, his concept of product market fit is you could land multiple companies, you could write a case study for all the companies, and then you could swap the logos from one case study to the other, and it would still be true. It would still be the same story. So most of the time, big enterprise whale clients have very different case studies. Well, this company was trying to do this in e-commerce, and this company over here was automating their logistics. And you're like, you couldn't swap the case studies of those. So they probably actually aren't a market. And who was it? Someone recently we were listening to was saying that the best founders can land clients in spite of there not even being a very strong fit, because they're such good salespeople. They get people excited, and they can give the illusion of having product market fit, and the client size can give the illusion of product market fit, because you're like, how could I not have product market fit? I have $5 million coming in every single year from all these clients. But if there isn't repeatability and scale, and the way to say, let's get more of these. So like we were working with a company that went to Y Combinator. They had landed multiple big accounts, and they're like, we don't want to rule out financial services because we just landed this big account. I'm like, awesome. How did you land the client? And he's like, well, I went to college with one of the C-suite. And I'm like, awesome. Do you have 100 more college buddies in this industry that you could ping who are also all in the C-suite of 100 other enterprises? And he's like, well, maybe not. And so it's like when you actually get behind the curtain and you land these 5 weird one-off things through the network, our VCs knew this guy, and I'm like, awesome. Do the VCs have 100 more people in that industry? And they're like, well, probably not. That's where the rubber meets the road. And like, even though you might be at 5 million or even 10 million, you could still be having the same problems of a company that's making 300,000, which is a big challenge.
And then if they keep going, the more of more in all the different directions, they will get stuck and it will be painful. Agencies have this problem, right? For every industry, we're going to do everything, and video and social media and everything. It's a chronic problem. If you're not saying no to somebody, you're going to get stuck pretty soon. So
there's one more problem, Greg, that we bump into sometimes, and it's always very awkward, is while markets are very large, sometimes we truly run into just a saturation of a market. And where a company comes in, they have some differentiation, and they look at the market, and it's just not big enough for their goals. And this is where we then almost have to step back, and like for the bootstrappers on the call, it's like, how big do you really need to get? And there are some hard realities of like, oh, the thing you built to solve that problem that used to be a $50 million problem is now a $10 million problem because of some changing dynamics. Those are harder to face for these founders, and I think they're more severe because that's where all the tech and marketing debt is there. And so it's less of a positioning challenge as it is like, oh no, I've built this thing on shifting ground, the market has moved, and then they have this like, I don't know, they have this big decision they have to make of like, do I stay in this business and maximize it for what it is, or do I truly have to pivot and build the next thing, knowing that the next thing you just can't do both at the same time. And I think the big mistake is trying to do both at the same time, where we see all this squirming of different markets, more products.
Yeah, and I've also seen the target market trap, where how can you be big unless you're for everybody, which VCs foment in their TAM slides. And you could be big, and we want to fund you, but you need to be bigger. And founders really don't know that that really doesn't work. Many things to many people doesn't scale very quickly. So they kind of hold on to, I can be many things for many people too late, just because they can't imagine being for just a corner of the market that's achievable, where they could build a $50 million company faster, but they don't see the math right away. Their eyes are too big for that. Okay, so lastly, I'll just ask each of you, how is AI playing into this these days? Positioning is a human brain problem. Like, this is how our brain speaks to each other. Is AI us moving to GPTs to ask questions and get recommendations, or tools, or it's another tactical superpower these days? How is AI changing anything in your frameworks or what you guys are doing? Rob, is AI moving anything yet?
Yeah, I think there's a few implications. So there's some layers to this. I think in terms of our framework and how you position, it actually is not changing much. I think that the nuance here, and Anthony and I, we were just talking about this, is with new technology, it can create these new markets, which in our model is usually new use cases. Basically, workflows and activities that people were not doing before. And so, like, one good example, we worked with a company where their whole focus was on building evaluators for building AI products. And it's like, you imagine that product years ago where like no one's building AI products. And like, so there's no need for building an evaluator to make sure that these responses are actually quality. And like, it's that type of thing that gets really tricky because when you're building it, as they say, skate where the puck's going, there's a world where you have to position for this use case that isn't mainstream. And so we have to unpack this in our model of like, hey, good positioning is still just speaking to that use case so that when someone has it, you show up as like they are the best way to handle that use case. They are the best way to build these evaluators. And I think what people end up conflating is the difference between demand gen of these new markets, these new activities as use cases versus actually capturing demand for an existing market. And so for that company, it's like, hey, let's position you this way. Just know there's maybe 100 people that are doing this right now, like super small. And so your marketing...
And you got to bet on that being a curve that's going to go up.
Yes, it's like your marketing is going to go bet on that, but then you should probably start making some long-term bets to evangelize this. And this is where all the category creation really comes in of like, how do I get more people to build apps? And not only that, how do I get more people to think they need to build evaluators when they're building these apps? Like that is a whole different challenge upstream of the product positioning. And so I think that's one of the biggest like mistakes and implications. The temptation people have is they skip this use case, this jobs to be done element, and they go right to these outcome broad statements and they just totally lose the plot altogether.
Well, that's what we experience when we go to a tech trade show and everybody's an AI thing for ROI for sales and marketing and they all sound the same and you don't really know what they do and it's all kind of vague, sounds hype language, that kind of thing. I get that.
The other way that we're more even tangibly using AI in our process is like we used to have to spend probably a whole workshop or two even just trying to understand the business that the company was in. Like we could do some preliminary research on Google. We'd literally be like an open-ended call where we'd be like, tell me about the product. And we'd watch the demo. Now with AI, we can do way more research on the front end, way easier. So we come into that first session, not just sounding like complete, newbies to the space. We can come in and be like, we know that in this space, people are primarily using these types of tools. Is that yet correct? And they're like, yeah, that's spot on. And we're like, and we know that these have these strengths. And it's all based on just prompting over and over, like, around questions of the categories and the maturity and different industries, and it is such a good knowledge resource that like we bring in those options, positioning strategy options, to the first call, where we would always have to do multiple calls before we could even get to any options at all, just getting our arms around it. And now we're like, we can front load a ton of the research and be able to step in, not as a industry expert or a subject matter expert of any means, but enough that we're like, hey, these are what we think are good starting points. And people will often be shocked. They'll be like, wow, this is like, it's like you guys know the industry super well. And we're like, we don't actually, but that's what's great about the technology is you can become a fast learner, because you can just keep asking it questions until it tells you what you need.
Clear positioning helps customers and prospects to be able to tell somebody else about it, the telephone game. It helps Google put you in search when we say we just do this just for these people, and we're amazing at it. Does a clear positioning help how the GPTs recommend you when people say, gosh, what should I use about this? What kind of security software should I use for this?
So I'll preface this with, we absolutely don't know. We are not GEO experts. We've actually worked with a couple of companies in the space, but the experiences we've had and working with these companies, the answer is yes. Like those models are built on top of the internet, crazy thing. And like the internet. And so like SEO still plays a role. And like, what gets you into the SEO? It's like, oh, you've made decisions about who you are for. And like where you show up matters. And so we've actually gotten a few leads from ChatGPT couldn't tell you how it happened, other than I would put us in the bucket of we position ourselves to doing this one really narrow thing for this very narrow group of people. And that seems to be paying off to date. And so I think that's the extent of my GEO AI knowledge, with a short answer of yes. And maybe Anthony has insights to layer.
Well, great. So very exciting. Congratulations. And your focus is made a very successful business for you guys. And you're very successful with the companies that you've worked with. I know several of them, and they tout your work. You guys are all over LinkedIn here. I'll just go to each of you. What general advice can you give practical founders out there who are don't have that final sweet positioning that's working this year, but they're, in startup mode or growth 1.0 mode or something like that? Rob, what advice do you have for these founders around, their positioning?
The first one for me, and I'm going to assume you don't really know if you have a positioning problem yet, I would create a 2-question survey to my whole company. Granted, it might be a small team, and I would just ask them, hey, how would you answer this question? What do we do? And how would you answer this question? Who are we for? Like, who is our ideal customer segment? And I would just then sit down and read those answers. And you're going to find out pretty quickly what's going on there. Anthony talks about a similar test of like, go into your homepage, pull out all the headers, and could you give that to somebody who doesn't know what you do? And could they understand it and spit it back to you? I think that's a big one. Like the awareness piece will send you then hopefully down a rabbit hole to solve it. And that's a great starting point.
Great. Thanks for that. Anthony?
I would say pretend you are a private equity firm that has just bought the company and has no emotional attachment to anything you've built and is just purely interested in how can I turn this from a 1x to a 5x? What would the PE firm do? And they probably would cut a lot of stuff that's not working, and they would make a lot of decisions that you are maybe too close to emotionally to be like, well, that's Bob's department, and we can't change that because of this, and we have all this history in there. But a PE firm that has no real, stake in the personal history of the business would be like, oh, you want to grow this thing? 80% of your revenue comes from these 20% of the customers. We're just going to cut off all this other stuff and go that direction, and then scale the business, and it probably would work. So you don't have to wait until the PE firm buys you.
I have seen that work.
Yeah. You could just do it yourself.
And not give it up to private equity. Well, awesome. I really appreciate you guys sharing your advice, some of your frameworks, and some of the stories, the many stories now. You guys are Rob and Anthony GPTs yourself, training, with story after story with all the companies you work with. How can people find you, and what should they do next? Anthony?
I think our LinkedIn's probably the best spot to start. Start following our content. We post, multiple times per week. And then if you're more interested in the actual service, it'd be fletchpmm.com.
Well, I really appreciate both of you helping out at Practical Founders Summit like you did, and being on the Practical Founders podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having us. Super fun.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for watching this week's interview on the Practical Founders podcast. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the Practical Founders YouTube channel to keep up with my weekly in-depth interviews with serious software founders who are building valuable software companies without big funding. You can check out my blog, all the podcast episodes, and information about my Practical Founders CEO peer groups at practicalfounders.com, or message me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. See you next week.